It is a stark reminder for the region. When tier one special ops people want to find you, like, they're going to get you. In short, Western Hemisphere is our backyard, and adversarial powers are not welcome. People are speculating, is this about oil? I think it is largely about oil, but not for the reason people think. Another one of the stories of 2025, of course, was the rare earth story, and China flexing its muscles and its control over supply chains of rare earth minerals. What China does not dominate is energy trade, and they import a lot of oil from Venezuela. And I think this was, in part, the president's way of telling the Chinese, you can do something to us, we can do something to you.
It's 2026, and we're back with the Bitcoin Policy Hour, as usual, joined by the crew from BPI here. I'll go down the line here. Start with Ken Egan, our Director of Government Affairs, Zach Shapiro, our Head of Policy, and Stephen Pollock, our Vice President of Advancement.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
My pleasure, Stephen. Hope you all had a great New Year's, and excited to be back with the crew. We're going to jump in today. We've got some good topics lined up. We're going to do a little predictions at the end, so make sure you stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, make sure that you're subscribed to both Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin Policy Institute on YouTube. That helps us out a lot, and make sure that you get the content right when we record it. So be sure to do that. It's right in the description below. So, all right, first topic for the day. Just going to jump right in. Obviously, haven't been together in a little bit, so I want to talk about the current events that dominated the early days of the new year, which was the detainment of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and the sort of preceding fallout that you might say will come after that. Ken, I want to flip it to you here just to give us sort of a brief description of the chain of events that we saw in Venezuela, and kind of what the implications are from just sort of a broad geopolitical perspective, and then we can dig into the more sort of Bitcoin related implications, but want to set the table first there.
Yeah, I think most people have been at least tangentially aware of the increasing sort of force presence and escalation of the use of force in the Caribbean over the past few months. There's been a lot of high publicity, highly publicized strikes against drug boats. There was a reported CIA drone strike against a drug loading area at a port in Venezuela. So there's been a gradual escalation of force, and when you see that kind of presence and that kind of escalation, it generally doesn't end in an off ramp. It's going in a certain direction. I think that my gut tells me that they're hopefully they would be able to choke Maduro out, and either encourage him to leave or encourage an ambitious general or an ambitious colonel to do the dirty work for them, to get him out of office. That didn't happen. So this escalation of presence and force culminated in his capture. Was it last week? And it is a stark reminder for the region of when tier one special ops people want to find you, like, they're going to get you. And it's some really interesting footage of people on their phones watching Chinook helicopters fly low over Caracas, landing and grabbing him. Again, this is what these guys do. I think that people are surprised. I think people shouldn't be surprised. One thing I think the world has learned is you take Donald Trump at his word. He's been very explicit about wanting Maduro out of office, out of power. And when other means didn't make that happen, he took care of it, and he did it. You can quibble whether it was the right move or not, but it was really an unbelievable operation. I mean, this cap of a large country. And 4 hours after these guys launched, 4 hours later, it was over, and Maduro was on a U.S. Navy ship. Pretty crazy. And I think contextually, the president released the national security strategy back in, I want to say, November, and everybody talked about the extreme focus on Latin America, Western Hemisphere. There's a lot of talk about the reemergence of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is probably more the Monroe Doctrine than sort of what historically the Monroe Doctrine was. But in short, Western Hemisphere is our backyard, and adversarial powers are not welcome. And I think you've seen after this sort of an escalation of rhetoric against the president of Colombia, who, after talking big game, had a call with the president this week. Delcy Rodriguez, the now president of Venezuela, who the day of had some harsh words and now has indicated she's willing to work with the United States. And I think just there was reporting just yesterday that the president is going to authorize land strikes against cartel infrastructure, and he included Mexico on that, which is certainly an escalation of scope from what was a focus on Venezuela. People are speculating, is this about oil? I think it is largely about oil, but not for the reason people think. I think another one of the stories of 2025, of course, was the rare earth story and China flexing its muscles and its control over supply chains of rare earth minerals. They dominate that infrastructure. What China does not dominate is energy trade, and they import a lot of oil from Venezuela. And I think this was in part the president's way of telling the Chinese, you can do something to us, we can do something to you, and we're going to now choke off one of your primary suppliers of oil, just because we can. So I think this is largely about oil, but oil in the geopolitical context, not necessarily about lowering gas prices for any of us. And there's all kinds of talk about the kind of crude it is and what kind of crude our refineries like and all that kind of thing. But I think it is in part about oil, but oil more as a geopolitical instrument rather than oil to give Stephen cheaper gas for his obscenely large pickup truck.
Ken, let's double tap on the sort of.
I don't get to respond to that.
No, you can respond in a second. The conversation about what the actual motive was for the sort of procession that happened. I'm curious, Ken. I think we got your take on this, Zach and Stephen. What's your take on why this happened when it happened? Is there a sort of theory that you think is most plausible here?
Sure. Why it happened when it happened. Well, I think the first thing is that my pickup truck gets great gas mileage.
It had to happen. He wasn't going to let it go.
8 miles a gallon downhill. No, I think when I saw this and this, we were all, we were all homesick on holiday, so I had plenty of time to just read and scroll like a lot of people. My first impression was that this was just like a terrifyingly flawless operation. And so that's the first impression, right? Not only like what happened on the ground, but like the way even, it was shared that like some news outlets knew this ahead of time and they chose not to. You pat yourself on the back, I guess. And that it was kind of kept, not just how it was, how it unfolded, but like the fact that it was kept secret and that, you had 150 some odd aircraft involved and all this sort of thing. And then sort of the second, I'll get to your question here. The second like wave was the fact that that everyone knew pretty much instantly that it was that type of operation and how well it went and all of the details and impressive, kind of feats, I guess, about it. And so to me, it's like, okay, like most people, like it's quite the signal to capture a world leader, quote unquote. It's another thing entirely to like have, filmed the whole thing and made a commercial for the world about what you just did. And so I think the timing is, I think what really was interesting was I think the original go night, you guys can correct me on this, I haven't seen this anywhere, but they said like we've been delaying it for 4 days. It seemed like they wanted to do it on New Year's Eve, right? I haven't seen that officially reported, but when I did the math, I was like, I think they wanted to do it on New Year's Eve, just to like, I guess, make it even more sensational. So obviously, and I know you want to talk about this later, but there's, I'll just say some other countries that we're, speaking to and kind of shouting at and shouting down, some other things we're making. And then on the back of it, announcing a $1.5 trillion defense budget. And which some are saying, we can talk about that again, as I think maybe another line of the conversation. But to me, I'm like, if you want a 1.5 trillion, if you want a 50% increase in your defense budget, what better way to sort of, kick that off than something like this. I don't think that's the only reason. Obviously, I think we can get a number of reasons, but to me, that seems like not an accident. That it's once the U.S. military has like one of their most successful operations in recent memory, we're like, hey, and we're gonna, we need an extra $500 billion.
Yeah. Look, so I definitely of this group, Ken is probably in the best position to judge. But my views are, people talk about all sorts of reasons for a mission like this. I'll say what I don't think it is. I don't think it is about oil. Oil is so cheap right now. The estimates are like it costs them like $80 a barrel to get the oil out of Venezuela, and oil's selling for I think maybe less than that right now. I don't think it's about human rights. The Trump administration, I think, has not been shy about saying they don't believe in the United States sort of imposing their values on other parts of the world. Um, I think partly, I think it really is this sort of Monroe Doctrine type of stuff. I think part of it is a deterrent for specifically China, Russia, Iran, Cuba to sort of conduct activities in our hemisphere, and we're going to project power here. And then I think it really is maybe the sense of a broader, projection of power or ownership over the Western Hemisphere by the United States, which is different than keeping our adversaries out. It's we're going to take a stronger hand. We're not going to let sort of hostile dictatorships even arise here if they're not coming from elsewhere. And I'm very curious to see, like, are we going to take a heavier hand in sort of patrolling the seas in the Caribbean, where there's right now a lot of piracy and bad activity, towards maybe developing the area economically? Are we going to take a different view towards natural resources in the Western Hemisphere? And, are we going to have more of a sort of client state relationship with our southern neighbors in a way that, maybe we did in sort of the middle of the 20th century, the beginning to the middle of the 20th century, and much in the way that China does with countries in their sort of immediate vicinity. So definitely all eyes on what else happens in the region. I think the president today announced they're planning to do military strikes against cartels in Mexico. I think there's no secret that Marco Rubio would like to get involved in Cuba. The president's made comments about the president of Colombia. So is this, the sort of cynical way to look at this is that this is sort of a distraction from unhappiness in domestic policy with sort of actions that the president can unilaterally take that make him look strong. Maybe there's some of that, but I do think that there is a sort of broader intent to take a heavier hand in sort of foreign affairs in this area. And it seems that the headlines, I think, look good compared to a lot of other stuff the administration is doing. So I expect that to sort of be reinforced.
One thing I want to add on, if I can, Zach, they just rebranded to Department of War, right? So I don't think that was a meme. Like I don't think any of this, Ken, like what you were saying, I think a lot of people keep looking at the Trump administration, keep thinking they're bluffing, and keep thinking they're joking around, and they do joke around, they do meme, but a lot of it is like, no, we're Department of War. We're going to be offensive, not just defensive. And they're like, all right, we got that change. It's time to start doing war stuff. And I think we're seeing it, like seriously, I think that's a big part of it. And everything Zach Shapiro just outlined is part of that strategy. And I think when they're, spiking the football on national television about the operation, and they're not so subtly hinting that there's more to come, and so better watch out, and so better watch out, for some reason, they're not being taken seriously then. And it's like, no, I actually think there's probably more to come, and probably relatively soon, and probably involving countries that we haven't even mentioned yet, that may be in a completely different theater. And so we can move that on to predictions later, but it's a serious, it's a pretty serious prediction, I understand, but I think I'm taking them seriously when they say some of these things.
You can't underestimate the coercive effect on friendly neighbors of what just happened. It's hard, right? I mean, he was literally plucked out of his bed at night, which is really, like, pretty amazing. And I think a lot of these authoritarian countries, like, the military and the security services get this inflated sense of power because they have power. Like it's really easy to like arrest protesters and civilians and that kind of thing. It's a lot different though when you're facing like Delta forces fast roving on your building and and then it's all hell's breaking loose. I also think that to expect that if the president's national security strategy is going to focus on the Western Hemisphere, as he announced, and he's been consistent about that, to have imagined that we would have let the biggest thorn in the side, the country that served as a platform for our strategic adversaries, China, Russia, to allow that to continue in a hemisphere that is a stated policy administration to dominate. People shouldn't be surprised that this is the result of that thinking.
I think the other interesting angle here, and this obviously I think supports everything that the three of you have said, is this tweet from Patrick Witt, who's the executive director of the White House Digital Asset Council, and he said, I'll just read a quote here: "As the Venezuelan people prepare to chart a new direction for their country, one that turns away from the poverty of collectivism and embraces the abundance that rugged individualism enables, their economic reconstruction efforts should strongly consider adopting US dollar and US dollar backed stablecoins as legal tender in their country." Ken, I know you and I discussed this, just briefly in the past week, but thinking about the White House and, the sort of executive branch as a whole and their, sort of strategic military and power vision, in the changing world order. Curious, maybe we can spend some time talking about the sort of monetary element here, thinking about Latin America, and what this signals, especially coming from someone fairly high up in the White House, and tweeting this publicly, right? And also, good nod to the Mamdani quote there. So
Yeah, he was.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but Patrick is a quick wit, as they say. It was good, huh?
Yeah, that was good.
No, let's be honest. Like the Genius Act was never about like making it easier for Zach Shapiro to use stablecoins. It was always about exploitation of the dollar. That's what it's all about. It's about how does a dollar retain its dominance in a world where dollar dominance is changing, or at least the Treasury standard is changing, evolving. Pick your word, and let's debate that. But there is a recognition, and I hear it from national security people all the time, and they've never had to deal with this situation before of like the monetary system. It's always just been something that they've used, right? It's the sort of the military equivalent metaphor would be like air superiority. We've had air superiority in monetary matters since the end of World War II. We've never had to think about it. All the forever wars. One thing you never worried about in Iraq or Afghanistan was the enemy airstrike, right? It wasn't coming. We own the air. And the metaphor is the same in the monetary system. For all the problems we faced, we own the monetary system. We own the rails, and we use those rails and operated in that sector freely. That's changing and evolving. And the smart people in DC, and I count Patrick Witt among them, understand that, and they're figuring out how to facilitate an evolution that remains advantageous to U.S. interests, and that means keeping some kind of dollar dominance, and as well as freedom of action on those rails. And stablecoins provide that. It's an easy way to spread dollar dominance. It is an easy way to manipulate those rails. They're software, right? So I think it makes perfect sense. I think there's been some deep thinking about that. It's very deliberate strategy to encourage dollarization through stablecoins. It scratches all kinds of itches. I'm sorry. It spreads dollar dominance. It allows people across the world who would never think of buying treasuries. It allows them to buy tokenized U.S. debt, which theoretically, if done correctly, pushes interest rates down, devalues the dollar slightly, and helps achieve other goals of the administration. It's a great way of exporting dollars with sort of getting around the Triffin dilemma, where historically, people, certainly Bitcoiners are familiar with Triffin dilemma. The cost of having the reserve currency on your industrial base. This allows us to export dollars without the adverse effects of exporting. The way to say this, to export capital. We're exporting dollars that are being born elsewhere. They're not being born in the U.S. system. So it helps. Frankly, it helps achieve a lot of the goals the administration is pursuing. And I think I'm certainly worth thinking about that BPI. I think people stay tuned. We have a lot of work coming out about this, both in Latin America, Africa, what it means for debt markets, what it means for dollarization, and we are at Bitcoin Policy Institute, what it means for Bitcoin. I still believe that stablecoin adoption will help accelerate the evolution of Bitcoin as a neutral reserve asset, because most people in the world aren't buying gold coins, because most people in the world don't have $4,500 to buy a 1 ounce gold coin. But a lot of people in the world have $5 to buy Bitcoin and to keep it in their wallet. So this is why we are doing what we can to support that on the policy side, on the sort of the deep thinking side, and maybe our head of policy has sort of even deeper thoughts about that than I do. Probably does.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we've sort of been out there saying, both Bitcoin and stablecoins are incredibly powerful vehicles for dollar diplomacy, and Bitcoin in particular, because of its permissionless nature, sort of implicitly exports American values to wherever it lands. It's not something that a sort of local dictator can block. And so, to the extent that we want to have a sort of friendlier, more open trade relationship on our terms with our southern neighbors, Bitcoin, I think, provides sort of ideal rails in order to do that.
There were, I think, also some reports coming out that Venezuela has a fairly substantial Bitcoin position. I'm not sure I'm totally in the loop on what the tie-in is, maybe from like a sort of international affairs perspective, but that was an interesting piece of information. And the other interesting piece was, the opposition leader, Maria Machado, I think is her name. She's a public Bitcoiner, and so there's definitely some Bitcoin tie-ins happening with this Venezuela story. Curious if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Well,
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
theory is that, or one working theory, and I mean, use the term theory loosely, that Venezuela was converting its gold or reserves into Bitcoin in order to kind of rainy day shelter them from something like what just happened. But I have no idea if that's true or not.
Yeah. There's a lot of reporting about they're using stable coins to sell oil and to buy things, and that makes perfect sense. I think there's some of the blockchain analytics companies have done research about that. So there's research about that, but there's also been a few pieces from some of these companies addressing the sort of the stash. Not that there's not Bitcoin held in Venezuela, but this large stash that people are referring to. I think when it was like 60,000 coins. I forget what the number was. It was a lot of money. And nobody seems to be able to locate wallets that make sense for that size. So who knows? I don't doubt that there's a lot of Bitcoin in Venezuela. And I actually think there's a great future of Bitcoin in Venezuela, because if you have a petrostate, a state that will certainly for the near term rely on its production of energy, what is a great sort of secondary benefit of energy production? It's a lot of spare resources, right? Spare flare gas, spare all kinds of stuff. And what a way to both be socially responsible and hit your environmental goals, while at the same time stacking and accumulating the hardest money on earth. So I do think, and something else we're thinking about here is, Trump had the president had the oil executives in the White House. I think today, they all got their marching orders from the White House, like, you must go and do these things in Venezuela. I haven't seen any reporting about it. But is that sort of the effort to actually, the real effort? I think we're still in for a few months of instability in Venezuela. Not necessarily like conflict, but just uncertainty, maybe is a better word than instability, at least that. But when we get to sort of the brass tacks and energy infrastructure, we start spending money. We are thinking about how Bitcoin miners can play a role in if not backdoor subsidizing that through what they're doing, to maybe help a new friendlier state actually accumulate Bitcoin.
Ken, you and I haven't had a chance to really catch up since this happened, with everything going on in the holidays. But I had a question for you to put you on the spot, that I've been wondering, and based on what you were saying. Well, I'll just put it this way: what about, if anything, about the operation in Venezuela, do you think sort of stands out as shockingly underreported, or maybe more consequential than it seems at first glance? Is there anything like that you're like, people seem to be missing something? I know it's been one of the most overanalyzed actions in recent memory in the last year or two, but yeah, I wanted to throw that out there and see if there was anything that kind of checked that box.
I mean, there was a lot of discussion about local collaborators on the ground in the days ahead of this. I think the president as much said that there was the CIA had an agent in the inner circle. If that's true, I hope that agent is no longer in Venezuela. But I think so. Yeah. I think the untold story is just that is what kind of collaboration was happening on the ground with disaffected members of security services, the military, whatnot, even friends of advisors to Maduro, other people. These things never happen. Like every Venezuelan opposition person in the world could have volunteered to help, and it wouldn't have mattered. But one or two well-placed people who are willing to tell you where he's at and who he's with and who's with him and what they got is really valuable. So the president has much said it, and there's been a lot of speculation, but it seems reasonable that there were people on the ground talking to the U.S. about who, what, when, where, and why.
There's also this, and I know we don't talk about Venezuela operation all the time, but there was also this we haven't talked about that like there was like a contingent of like Chinese officials that were staying, like were like still there, right, from like a very important high level meeting the previous day, right? And so not only was it sort of like, obviously there's no way China can say that, oh, we kind of knew this was going on, so they were caught with
I don't think it was the Chinese. I think this is not good. I don't think they're happy about this. But imagine like you're in your hotel, your counterparts took you to dinner and you head back to the hotel. You're a little tipsy, and then you like hit the balcony and you see the fireworks start. Pretty amazing. Yeah, pretty amazing. Certainly a show of force, and just a reminder of like the things we can do that I think they aspire to be able to do. Let's just hope they don't try to prove it anytime soon. But yeah,
that's the other side, right? So if we saw another country do something, right? Like we kind of see through our own, whatever glasses, whether you love it, hate it, whatever. But it's our military, it's our administration. If we saw another country, we saw like Russia or China do something, what would be like a similar level, operation? Is it obviously not Russia invading Ukraine? That's a whole different ballgame. But like, what would, or China invading Taiwan? But what level of shock, I guess, are those countries experiencing, and what would it take? What would kind of give us that same shock in the United States? Does that make sense?
I think the Russians tried to do it in Kiev, right, in February 2022. It just didn't work. But you remember also, like, again, for all the talk, like Venezuela has been in a chokehold for a long time. Taiwan has not been in a chokehold. Taiwan is a developed country. It has a professional military. It's kind of apples and beef jerky. But you could see Russia do something like in, I don't know, the Baltics, where like, I mean, Russia's got some pretty like snazzy special ops guys, right? And a lot of experience. It's not hard to envision, a night like that where they've got similar thing. They have local collaborators and Spetsnaz and some of their sort of super secret squirrel guys, infiltrate, drop in, and grab the president of, I don't want to speculate, but grab the president of a bordering country. That's not hard to imagine. Again, these are countries that are like, functional, and they have populations that are generally supportive of their government. So you'd have a different response. Unless though, there are a lot of capitals that are not very far away from the Russian border. So I think you'd think something like that more than like China deciding to try to invade Taiwan. That's a different ballgame.
Yeah, it's hard. It's not that hard to imagine, and now it's even way less difficult to imagine, right?
Yeah.
Because president's been said. I relinquish the mic. Sorry,
No, it was a good conversation.
I hadn't talked to Ken in a while.
Yeah, we'll shift gears though. There was some recent reporting, I think, within the last week, that the Department of Justice transferred some of the seized funds from the Samurai wallet proceedings, and obviously those, Keone and Bill have both reported for their sentences by now. I think that's a new development since we spoke last, but I think the big shocker here was that there was reporting that some of the seized coins were being transferred to Coinbase Prime. Obviously, that's not full evidence that the coins are being sold, but is pretty good evidence of that. Curious on everyone's thoughts on this. I think Zach Shapiro, obviously, you've been pretty close to the Samurai wallet case since that came down. Just kind of curious on the landscape here. It seems like the story just keeps getting worse.
Yeah, I think we might have accidentally broken this story on this podcast a few months ago. We've known this for a while. We hadn't want to make a big public deal of it because, frankly, we wanted to sort of back channel this and work this out with the government. And now that it's out there, I guess we can publicly state, I think the right solution to this problem is for the government to buy back the coins for the SBR that should have been there in the first place. But notwithstanding the executive order creating the strategic Bitcoin reserve that says that all Bitcoin that is finally forfeited as part of a criminal prosecution, which was clearly the Bitcoin in this case, the government's not going to sell any more of that and is looking for more ways to acquire that. And the government and the U.S. Marshal Service in this case signed a forfeiture order with the defendants that clearly stated the government was going to liquidate the Bitcoin, and that's what we believe happened. And so I don't think this is a terribly complicated story. This seems like parts of the DOJ ignoring an executive order by the president. The DOJ reports to the president. I think this was an illegal sale of the Bitcoin, and I think the right thing to do is to go buy back.
Curious if anyone has thoughts on whether that is likely to happen.
But by the way, the price is down, so it'd be a bargain. We can't afford not to.
I don't think they're going to buy it back in the sense of like, I don't think they're going to say, oh, sorry about that. We'll go ahead and buy it back. But I think they will buy more Bitcoin and probably, quote unquote, buy it back. But I have a hard time. It's an illegal sale. I'm curious. I mean, I think forcing them to do it would set a really great precedent. And I hope they do. But it seems a little murky, that they did it in the first place. And, I don't know, Zach, what are the legal, what legal ramifications? Like, is somebody get prosecuted for how's that work?
Probably not.
Right.
But
if not, then,
Oh, but I mean, they can correct, right? Like the government can't just decide to ignore executive orders. And so like there should be a fix here. There should be recourse, not necessarily personally visited upon the officials that violated the executive order. Although I don't know if if their stuff comes to light that they were violating this order to spite the president. I can't imagine that's really good for the employment prospects of the U.S. Marshals or the federal prosecutors that were behind it. So maybe that merits some level of investigation. I would like to know why they seemingly feel free to violate the executive order, or if they didn't know about it. I mean, maybe that's a good note for us at BPI. Like, if there haven't been trainings at any of the relevant parts of the executive branch that are subject to this executive order, maybe that's something that should happen. But I think that the recourse for this doesn't need to be personal for it to be effective.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
But there is some kind of disconnect, right? Like, I imagine like these keys are not like sitting in the hands of like a GS10, right? Who can just get on his or her phone and sell them, right? It doesn't work that way. There's a process. This is like seized government property. There are memos. There's a process for this. Like, there are at some point in this process, there are sort of metaphorical adults, relatively senior government officials who have to approve things to make it happen. And again, it's interesting. It's not, and I'm not blaming Coinbase. Get mad at me, but like, I mean, Coinbase has a big presence here. They know what these coins are. Like I would not be surprised if someone Coinbase was like, damn, these are the samurai coins. Like, what's going on with this? And it's not their fault. I'm not saying it's their fault. I'm just saying, like, there's a big disconnect between like what we think the administration wants to do, which is hold these things, and then a whole chain of things that have to happen that culminate in like the transfer of these coins from government custody to the custodian. So I don't know. I don't know. There's
I don't think you can put it that much on Coinbase, even if people at Coinbase did recognize
not their fault.
that.
It's not Coinbase's fault. They're just saying,
like
just saying.
they don't want to lose the federal government's business. That's a big thing for them. I think the way this works is it's the Marshal Service deals with holding and disposing of the property. It's the U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutors that deal with the essentially the bargains with the defendants about what's going to be forfeited and what's going to happen to it. And so the prosecutors sign an agreement with the defendants. They transmit that to the Marshal Service, and the Marshal Service, with their longstanding relationship with Coinbase, they use Coinbase to execute it. I think if Coinbase was like, hey, we're sort of second guessing the Marshal Service and ratting on them to the administration,
Yeah,
they,
of course,
that's probably not great for their bottom line.
Yeah, there's a lot of parties to this that we're just doing their job, right? 100%, whether it's Coinbase or whether it's whoever. I was told do this and do it. People in the government. I'm sure there's a massive, probably 500 people that touch this. It was just also maybe part of the problem, right? Playing a game of telephone about what to do with this, with these assets. But what I was trying to get to earlier, poorly, was just there is someone or a group of people who did make this decision and either were ignorant of the executive order and how it applied in this situation, which, I can see, or directly defied it. And so I think knowing that would at least be helpful. And Ken, I know what you're saying. You're like, there's no way, and maybe not, but I guess I'm open to the fact that this was like an innocent mistake, but it just doesn't seem like, I don't know how that's possible.
I think we need Nick Shirley to come to DC with his camera and like start banging on doors and like chase people down the street and you're like, what's up? Why'd you sell the coins?
It's one way to do it for sure.
Yeah, he said he's busy though. He said he's got like a bunch of projects he's working on, his weekly videos. So maybe you'll have to do it. I think the other interesting angle here, going back to our friend Patrick Witt, is hey, we're looking into this, and so I think what Zach is saying might be right, which is hey, something went wrong here, intentional or unintentional, and the White House has taken notice and might take steps to correct that and either buy the coins back or figure out what happened and maybe bring that to light. But I feel like that's been an interesting trend lately, and I'm curious for y'all to weigh in on this. But there was a press conference where a journalist mentioned pardons for Bill and Keone. And Trump said, hey, I heard about this. We're going to look into it. I'm going to talk to my people about it. We've got Patrick Witt saying, hey, we've got this violation of the executive order. We're going to look into it. From my perspective, it feels like, there's a lot of looking into it and, maybe not a lot of answers. And maybe that's skeptical of me, but it feels like an interesting time, working on Bitcoin policy, with this administration who's been very positive. And I think a lot of people have complained that, hey, there's a lot of positive rhetoric and not as much movement. Curious if anything's changed.
I think when that question was asked, the president said, Pam, will you look into that? He was talking to Pam Bondi. And so, there's, a few people that you would like to look into it. She's probably one of them. And so there is a lot of, I don't think what's happening is that there's like a lot of noise and like not a lot of action. I don't believe that that's the case. I think there are, just like Patrick Witt. I mean, I take him at his word. And I think he knows exactly what he's doing. And I think the administration, there's a lot of people that are digging into all of this. I just think it's like everything, it just takes quite a long time to get it going. It's just like what we talked about when the executive order first came out. Like, this is a huge, like historical win, but this is going to take some time to work its way, through the the veins and of the government, and I think we're seeing some of that pain probably play out here, and then with the pardons and things that I don't know. I obviously don't know, but man, I think it's pretty incredible that these things are happening like in front of everyone, and those questions are being asked and being addressed, and being people are looking into it. I think they actually do mean it when they say they're looking into it. To answer your question.
All right. Following up on another thing coming out of the White House, there was a comment earlier today. I think our friend Frank Corva was at the White House press meeting, and he got an opportunity to ask Caroline, the press secretary, about the status of the market structure legislation. Obviously, we were tracking that pretty closely for most of last year. I think maybe since we launched this podcast, Zach Pines and I were talking about that. And it obviously didn't get over the finish line before the new year. And so trying to see if there's some new momentum here. Caroline Leavitt said that they're, planning a whole signing ceremony for it tomorrow, which seems optimistic. But yeah, curious from our folks who are tracking that, what the status is, and seems like it's moving again.
Did she actually say that there's a signing ceremony tomorrow?
Yeah, I think she may have gotten something mixed
I mean,
up.
she's human. Yeah, you can tell the mistakes. So I think there was a very interesting document leaked this week. Clearly a photocopy that was scanned, so there's no like watermarks on it, of the state of play, sort of the notes for markup for the bill. But markup is essentially negotiations between the two parties. The who wants what's to be negotiated, what's been agreed upon. That was leaked this week, and it's very instructive because it sort of shows you where there are points of agreements, and it shows you where there are points of contention. And a lot of the stuff again is really not important to Bitcoiners, but there are a few things that come that pop that are consistent with the document that are like I think should get our attention. And these are the first things we'll be looking at when we actually get text. There are a lot of mentions of illicit finance. For me, illicit finance is always code for self-custody. It's code for KYC. I tell this all the time to congressional staffers, like Stephen's ability to hold Bitcoin does not affect North Korea's ability to steal it, to steal, Ethereum. So I whatever. It's my rant, and I won't do it because it's 2026, and I resolve not to rant about that anymore. But there are a lot of Democratic asks about illicit finance. There's no details, right? It's just they're asking about this, which is again from illicit finance. For me, it's code for those things. There's a hanging Chad, sort of just says self-hosted wallets there, and it cites Treasury technical assistance. So there's been discussions back and forth between Congress and Treasury about something about self-hosted wallets. Don't know what it means. There's no details. We'll see that when it comes out. And then finally, way at the bottom of this memo, I don't know what it is, 5 pages. It just says Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act at the bottom. Nothing else. Just there it is, lingering. Of course, good Bitcoiners, good listeners will know that the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act provisions are the one thing that you need to care about in this legislation. The rest of it about printing tokens and who can sell tokens and whatever, you might not like it, but whatever. We don't care about that. We do care a lot about BRCA. So it's mentioned, it's sort of just lingering there as an afterthought, as the last line in this memo certainly got our attention. So when we get text, and then you saw Senator Lemus today, so like a little bit of a tease. She took a picture and tweeted out just the header of it. But they're under rules. They're under they're supposed to release it, so they're not releasing it. But it was a good tease. But it does remind the community that now these things are being discussed. But it's those provisions, the random self-hosted wallets, constant referrals to illicit finance, whatever the hell that means. And then all the way at the end, and by the way, Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. So stay frosty, people. I mean, keep following us. When the second we get text, we'll be yapping about it on Twitter. But the sort of the final discussions about this are sort of within sight. So we need to get our shit together and be ready to make sure that the things that are important to us, that are frankly important to Bitcoin, are protected.
Thank you. That's helpful state of play. Zach, I don't know if you have anything to add here.
Yeah. I think one thing to look out for that we have some clues about is we talked about here a few months back, there was sort of a Democratic proposal for some of the illicit finance stuff that ended up leaking and caused a little bit of a firestorm, rightly so, because it was terrible. And that clearly isn't going to fly, and I think the Democrats understand that's not going to fly, and so everyone's looking for compromises in the sort of illicit finance arena. We've seen a couple touch points from Democrats how they want to approach these compromises, and a lot of it is around basically carving out genuine DeFi, which is not subject to the Bank Secrecy Act, from decentralized and name only or not really decentralized DeFi. And I think there are some cases where that distinction is not crazy, where it makes sense, right? There are a lot of apps out there that are really run by a company, or protocols that are run by a company that claim to be decentralized, and they're really within the control of a firm. But for the purpose of illicit finance laws, if you actually look at sort of the policy and legal questions, oftentimes the question is not about is something decentralized or not. Really, the much better metric of is something properly under the Bank Secrecy Act is about custody. Is it non-custodial or is it custodial? Is it hosted or non-hosted in sort of the government's terminology? And so one thing to look at for is sort of an overemphasis on this question of decentralization, when that's sort of one of the two axes on which we can distinguish sort of peer-to-peer software tools from actual regulated financial activity. I think I would put a very high percentage chance that that's going to come up, and that's going to be one of the issues that we're going to end up arguing about. The second note I had looking at that was, again, reference part of this, but there's Special Measure 6, which gives extra authorities to FinCEN to sort of do sanctions stuff in crypto world. And then there is a reference to self-hosted wallets. We don't really know what that's going to be. Both of those mention technical assistance from the Treasury Department. We also know from the leaked Democratic memo that the way they wanted to sort of deal with the non-decentralized versus decentralized DeFi apps is to let the Treasury Department essentially decide what they thought was decentralized or not. That was their metric. Obviously, that's not going to fly, but one thing to look out for is how much authority are we giving specific government agencies, whether that's Treasury writ large or specific sub-departments of the Treasury like OFAC or FinCEN, to just make these determinations that could really collapse any protections that we have, right? If we have strong protections for a protected class of tool, but whether or not you qualify for that class is just up to the government, that's not really such great protections. As Ken mentioned, in the list of things they still have to discuss and hash out are the two things we care about most. One is Section 1960, which is the criminal statute for unlicensed money transmission that could apply to software developers, and the other is the BRCA, which is sort of the inverse of Section 1960. And then just one other thing is it calls for a bunch of studies, some of which, like studies are not in themselves bad, but they can give you a sense of the direction of what sort of people care about. And two, to know, one is a study on mixers and tumblers. And I think it's really important that we sort of conceptually maintain a distinction legally between what I would call a mixer or tumbler, right? A custodial tool where people are, taking in digital assets, mixing them, and then sending out digital assets, and then a protocol where people can sort of collectively spend Bitcoin digital assets like a coin join, where I don't think that's properly understood as a mixer or tumbler. And then there's also, this part's interesting because it can really cut both ways, and it's going to be a controversial topic down the road. But automated regulatory compliance is another one study they want to do. The upside of that is just from a UI perspective, being able to have good sort of automated OFAC screening makes sense. I even think some standards for sort of non-SDN blacklists, where look, there are people that we know are criminals, whether they're running a dark web market for CSAM material, or they're international drug dealers, or they're terrorists. We can sort of have options to just automatically screen out those transactions rather than putting huge compliance burdens on especially small crypto companies. On the other hand, the worry is if these tools exist and if the government's sort of promoting these tools, does that basically become a requirement to implement them, and then essentially like a prior restraint from a free speech perspective? So that's another thing to keep an eye on. The proposal here is not to implement those these tools are not ready for prime time yet, but there's a study on those. So those were sort of my reactions to the specifics of the document we saw.
And then just a quick sort of like procedural question. When we get to this, markup phase, sort of, the state of play gets charted out, is that generally a sign that we're on the doorstep? Or is this something that we think is going to drag on for a while?
It might drag on. I think this is the final stage where we're going to find out what this thing will look like. And I think we're going to get a lot of information. If this is, the markup happens and like everyone's pretty close to something that looks doable, that's a really good sign, and maybe it'll go quickly. If it's in a middle ground, it could drag out for a while. And if they're really far apart, it might be a sign this is not going to happen.
Any final thoughts? Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, sort of, adjacent to this, I guess, question for the floor. Yesterday, World Liberty Financial, USD1, announced they had, filed for a federal banking charter. What do we think about the timing of that announcement? And, how's that interact with, does that help or hurt market structure?
I mean, there in that document we've been discussing, there are also random references to ethics. Again, don't know, but based on what we've been hearing from Democrats on the Hill, ethics is conflicts of interest, and conflict of interest, just like illicit finance is code for self-custody, what you call it, ethics is code for the Trump family. So I don't know, man. Like it certainly doesn't help the politics of it, right? Like we heard from pretty good informed staffers that like they're hoping to get this thing wrapped up by March on both sides. But yeah, like everything else, like like everything else, the best laid plans.
Right.
I think the ethics concerns are pretty baked in. This is going to be a big issue. It is something that absolutely could kill this bill, but I don't know that any last minute wrangling, with the OCC charter is what's going to move the needle one way or another.
Gonna transition here to the final part of the show. This is probably the part that everybody's been waiting for, and we'll probably go a little bit past the hour here, but want to jump in and do some predictions. I think 2025 was a very big year for Bitcoin and Bitcoin policy. Maybe not Bitcoin price, but Bitcoin policy for sure. And I think there's a lot to look forward to here in 2026. So I think we'll probably just go around the horn here. Maybe we'll start with Ken, go to Zach, and then Steven, and then we'll see how we're doing.
Yeah, Bitcoin predictions, not world predictions. I actually think that like, and I've been sort of like thinking about this and tweeting about it. Like, I really do believe that like, and I think that we're off to the right start to realize this sort of thinking. But I do think that like this is the year where Bitcoin achieves that sort of level of self-actualization that we've always hoped for. I think what's happening globally, politically, is going to facilitate that. I think sort of the evolution of the system is about to hit escape velocity. I think that you've got a workable consensus in the NatSec establishment, national security establishment, how the United States uses monetary policy. And then those inputs being stablecoins and Bitcoin, has evolved. And I'm not saying that there's people in Treasury who are going to come out and say we need to move to Bitcoin standard. But I do think that there is a growing understanding of at least openness to the thinking. And this is significant because they've listened, but openness to the idea that Bitcoin does serve as an alternative, as a neutral reserve asset to gold. There's a lot of talk about gold in DC. I think we're going to continue hearing a lot about gold in 2026. And the sort of basic thesis outside speculation, paper gold, the basic thesis about neutral reserve asset, that is gold and debasement. So I think you have sort of the Venn diagram of evolution. I don't want to say devolution, but sort of evolution of the international order. I think you have a consensus in the national security establishment that the monetary order is going to change, and they're going to look for ways to help to facilitate that change. They're advantageous. I think you are certainly going to see continued debasement of fiat. And I 100%. I mean that's sort of baked in, right? And I think as people, as big players, institutions, but even just the poor people that we often always forget about when we talk about these big moves. are going to realize that there's a lot of uncertainty, and the way to hedge that uncertainty, you can use your stablecoins to buy stuff, but you want to save in an asset that you could truly own, and that's Bitcoin. So I think this is where you really see the evolution and the sort of realization of like, again, I think the self-actualization of the Bitcoin thesis, that people are going to understand that separation of money from state is a real thing, that it serves the interest not just of like outlier states that we've sort of always thought that I think are using gold for that, but there'll be other states that we are looking to build bridges to, like Latin America, which has not adopted gold at the rate that Asia has, for example. I think you're going to see increasingly, and I think it's going to be driven in part by U.S. policy. You're going to see increased dollarization, and you're going to see sort of increased acceptance of that sort of self-actualized vision for Bitcoin, which is the pristine collateral, the pristine neutral reserve asset that you can hold. Again, you can't, most people can't afford to like buy gold. Doesn't matter what the price is, but everybody can afford to buy some Bitcoin. Well, most people can. But for me, I think you've got the stars are perfectly aligned for that, for Bitcoin, literally self-actualization. It's like, it's kind of touchy-feely. But I think you'll see, but this is where the thesis plays out. Because up until now, it's been people like it. It's a good asset, have 2% of your portfolio. We've had ETFs, all the things, right? But now, in the things we've always talked about, like what is money in a new multipolar world, where the nature of fiat changes, and you have to fend for yourself. And I think you are going to see that play out increasingly in 2026. And that doesn't mean there's going to be World War III. That just means you're going to see a very, very different world order December 31st this year than you had December 31st of last year. And then I think I am actually, I'm going to use the word bullish. I'm just very, very confident that you are going to, that large swaths of the world are going to, and it's going to be a large part facilitated by things that we do in Washington, are going to recognize the role that Bitcoin can play in their lives, both their lives, their states, or institutions. And again, I don't make price predictions. I will over drinks, but I'm certainly super bullish on the sort of all of acceptance of that thesis. So I think this is it. I think at the end of this year, Bitcoin hasn't really gained traction, because there's no stopping the evolution that I think is going to feed that thesis. If Bitcoin hasn't gained traction in this year, I'll be very, very surprised, and something else has changed. But all the stars are aligned for global realignment, and what better for participants in that realignment to, again, store their wealth in the hardest money possible, Bitcoin.
Ken will be making price predictions at the 2026 Bitcoin Policy Summit in September. So tickets will be going live for that soon.
That's actually the entire summit. It's just Ken.
Right, get a drink. All right.
Exactly. All right, Shapiro, you're up.
I am really terrible at price predictions. I'm not going to do that. I have two predictions for 2026 that are not directly Bitcoin related, but I'll make them Bitcoin related. One is about the housing market. I think, there's a lot of talk about the economy running hot. But, the people don't like inflation. People remember inflation from 2021, 2022. There's only so much, from policy perspective that the administration can do. But everyone cares about housing. I definitely think there are, multiple generations now that are just sort of extremely upset that, we've been locked out of the housing market, that it's not functional, especially now that interest rates are higher. It feels unfair that, the time to buy a house was a couple of years ago. And that's really it. You're locked in or out of that class. And I've been hearing, some of this are public, but the administration is planning to do a lot of stuff around housing policy to encourage the home builders to build a lot. They might guarantee down payments for Americans. I think we're going to see large housing related policy that, may in the short term accelerate housing prices, just because it'll create more demand. It'll get the market going a lot more. But in the long term, if they're successful in building out the sort of supply side of housing, maybe that makes real estate look less like a good long-term store of value. Right. Instead of having inflation in the rearview mirror and housing sort of unaffordability now, people are going to remember sort of like this period in time where houses did not move. People who are, over their skis on leveraged Airbnbs are barely treading water. It's like not a great asset class. Plus, they're making a lot more houses. If we're able to change that policy effectively, I think this would be a great outcome. I don't think houses should be a store of value. I think housing being used as a store of value is a terrible externality of the fiat monetary system. So I think we're going to see significant movement there. I don't know what price direction ultimately that's going to cause houses to go, right? Markets could be forward looking and saying we're going to have more supply, or they could be more short termist about the increased demand. But we're going to see movement there. And that, just like the gold conversation, helps bring people to sort of the understanding of the role that Bitcoin can play as a store of value, as opposed to sort of the classic, non-fiat alternatives. The other prediction, I'm going to make this optimistic prediction for sort of Bitcoin development. I've sort of long thought that one of the things we need most in Bitcoin to move sort of the mission forward doesn't come from the policy world, it comes from the development world. And I sometimes describe the work that we do at BPI as sort of a rearguard action to protect the developers and the entrepreneurs who are building out the tools that make Bitcoin successful. And then in my sort of private law practice, I love working with people who build in the space. Recently, I have been introduced to Claude Code, which is insane. I'm just really bad at administrative tasks and anything that requires me signing up for any tool. And even I have been able to build out sort of a website, multiple web apps, stuff like that, just in ordinary language with Claude Code, not really even asking it to anything special, just saying what I want. And then when it doesn't work, being like, hey, this doesn't work, please fix it. And then by the fourth or fifth time of just saying, please fix, like an MD at a bank, it figures it out and gets it right. That's magic. I think, these tools are only going to get better. And I think as a result of that, we're going to see a huge proliferation of open source Bitcoin tools. I think the number of people out there, right? There are a lot of people who are sort of Bitcoin obsessive, who have their idea of like, this is the killer app for Bitcoin. It is notoriously incredibly difficult to raise venture money for a Bitcoin startup. There are very few business models that work in the Bitcoin space. It's really hard to make money as a Bitcoin startup. And so that really kind of stunts the development ecosystem. And, I don't think we're going to vibe code, into Bitcoin Core, but I think in terms of like sort of little tools that make Bitcoin more useful, I think this is going to be sort of the golden age of hobbyist vibe coding these applications.
Love it. All right, Steven, you're up.
So there are rumors that Zach Cohen vibe codes. I'm just saying, that's like out there. It's out there in the ether.
Big
Guilty.
vibe coder.
He definitely vibes. I don't know about the coding part. I do have a price prediction. I'm pretty confident in, two, actually. Bitcoin will hit $500,000 at some point in the future. And this year, I do think that I feel good. I feel confident that we will cross the $100,000 threshold again at some point. That's it. You can mark them down.
Do you think Saylor is going to host another 100K party?
We'll have to have him on the pod and ask him. No, jokes aside, Ken, you kind of front ran me per usual. But this is basically a policy hour recap. When you look at what just happened in Venezuela, what we're talking about doing in Greenland, I have no reason to think we're joking anymore. And everything else that's sort of happening internationally. Precious metals are absolutely screaming. Silver's like $80-something or was or whatever. I mentioned this earlier. Wartime budget, $1.5 trillion, unlike anything we've ever seen. I think it's a $600 billion increase. Fannie and Freddie, Zach, you were talking about, housing. Essentially, the Trump administration is conducting its own version of QE, dumping $200 billion into mortgage bonds. And a market structure bill that still has BRCA at the bottom of it. It's January 9th, guys. And so I don't think an election year. So I think we're just getting started on all these fronts, whether it's like, sort of reshuffling the international deck here, and some of the, you know, full pedal through the floor measures on QE and firing up the economy again. And so my prediction, my real one, is that when we are sitting here doing the Bitcoin Policy Hour podcast the last week, you know, before Christmas or New Year's, and we're sort of rehashing the year, or you see those videos, right? You know, the recap videos of the year, and you're like, and we saw that, and we were looking back at everything that happened this year, and we're like, I was like, was the strategic Bitcoin reserve this year? You know, at the end of last year, I was like, was this the same year? It feels like a long time ago. I think that everything we just talked about, and everything I just mentioned, we will not be talking about, because there will be so many other crazy developments and operations, and so I think, you know, I think that we will remember this major story about Venezuela at the end of next year and be like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened, because there was so much else that happened this year. And so I think it's going to be one for the books. I think it's going to be good. It's going to be bad. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be great. It's going to be everything. But I think that is going to, I think all of that is the reason I agree with what Ken's saying. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be madness, and things, the tables, international orders, the tables are going to be turned over. And so I think, you know, Bitcoin rises to its rightful place in that environment, and sort of, I think what you said, Ken, was like sort of fulfills its you know, destiny in a way there. And so, yeah, I think that is very likely. I'll be shocked if this is, everything we just talked about is still even in the top 10 of like the biggest news from 2026.
All right, I'm gonna round us out here. I think really the thing that caught me, and you know, can't remember when this really blew up, but I think it was in 2026, was the Minnesota fraud, and the response that followed that video. Um, and I think that the thing that's most interesting about that is as we enter this midterm season, um, I think there's just going to be more eyes on government spending, you know, particularly the waste, fraud, and abuse. And we had a little bit of a precursor, maybe more than a precursor, with Doge, in, you know, in the first bit of 2025, and then I think people were like, oh, okay, well, that was a failed experiment. Um, and you know, I think there was also some Elon politics that maybe muddied the waters there a little bit. Um, but I think, you know, turning to Bitcoin from this sort of angle is, um, you know, look, we have the most scarce asset the world has ever seen. Um, and, you know, there's not very many of them. And the US government has basically made a carve out for us to buy them. And instead of doing that, we're wasting money on, you know, Somalian daycares that don't have kids in them. And, you know, you can't enroll little Johnny. And I think that's a pretty stark contrast that somebody probably ought to capitalize on. And I think, you know, 2026 might be the year where that contrast is brought to light and talked about. And I think it's a really natural synergy, you know, for the state of play in, you know, in our current political situation. So that's my thoughts. I think, you know, yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Did you see the video today? Treasury Secretary was saying that it was on video. He was being interviewed. Said that he estimates 10% of the U.S. budget is fraud, and that they're going to do something about it. So 10% of the entire budget is what you described.
Yeah. And you know, there's also the other angle to it of, you know, hey, we brought in the most sort of skilled operator at cutting costs and getting rid of, you know, waste, in Elon Musk, right? Remember what he did with Twitter. You know, great picture of him walking in with the sink. And even he, you know, couldn't steer this ship straight. And so I think, you know, there might also be something to be said about the nature of the fiat system, the nature of, you know, Triffin's dilemma, you know, that's really at play here. At the same time, I think if it becomes a sort of public issue in the way that I think this recent video, in Minnesota came to light. That could bring some pretty significant change. So I'm hopeful to see that. I think as a younger person, that's something I'd like to see, and I think my friends and peers would generally agree with me. And so, that's my hope for this year. I'm hoping politicians, they see the light on this, and and I think the Bitcoin angle is a good way to tie in as well. So,
Zach, Colin, can you give us a price prediction? Come on.
Well, Stephen, I think you said something that I'd been thinking about a little bit, which was this sort of like QE. The policy of quantitative tightening ended in December publicly, and that means liquidity is probably coming, and so I think that's bullish. I'm not gonna give you a price prediction here, but yeah, historically speaking, when QE is the policy, prices is going up. So, yeah, we'll see.
It's gonna be a fun year, guys. I'm excited about walking through it with everyone who's listening and all the gentlemen here on the podcast
Wow.
and chopping it up week in, week out.
Well said. We'll see everyone next week.